From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life.
Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testifies publicly for the first time at an historic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. We'll bring you her full opening statement. Then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh.
This has destroyed my family and my good name. A good name built up through decades of very hard work and public service at the highest levels of the American government. This whole two-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election.
Today, we play excerpts of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
You may defeat me in the final vote, but you'll never get me to quit.
All
Never.
that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In an historic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, whose implications will determine the makeup of the Supreme Court for a generation to come, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford spoke publicly for the first time about her allegations that Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her in the 1980s when she was 15 years old.
Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me.
After her testimony, Dr. Blasey Ford was questioned by Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee who hailed her testimony as courageous and heroic. This is Illinois Senator Dick Durbin.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
Not one of the 11 Republican senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who are all white men, questioned Dr. Blasey Ford directly, instead ceding all their time to Rachel Mitchell, an Arizona sex crimes prosecutor, longtime registered Republican, who Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called a female assistant. Mitchell was also scheduled to question Brett Kavanaugh on behalf of the Republican senators, but was quickly stopped from her line of questioning by them after she asked Brett Kavanaugh about details of the parties he attended in the summer of 1982, around the time the alleged sexual assault took place. In his testimony to the committee, Judge Kavanaugh repeatedly denied Dr. Blasey Ford's allegations, denouncing them with barely controlled rage and repeatedly choking up with tears in his eyes. He singled out Democrats on the committee, accusing them of staging a circus aimed at derailing his nomination.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation.
Just as Thursday's hearing gavelled to a close, President Trump took to Twitter to demand an immediate Senate vote on Kavanaugh's nomination, tweeting, "Judge Kavanaugh showed America exactly why I nominated him. His testimony was powerful, honest, and riveting," unquote. Republican Senate leaders are poised to hold a vote today after they reconvene the Senate Judiciary Committee at 9:30 a.m. A vote by the full Senate could come as early as this weekend or Monday or Tuesday. The planned vote comes as the American Bar Associations demanded a delay in Kavanaugh's confirmation process and an FBI investigation as well into claims of sexual assault. And editors of America magazine, the national weekly published by the Jesuits of the United States, called for Kavanaugh's nomination to be withdrawn. Georgetown Prep School, where Kavanaugh was a student when he allegedly assaulted Blasey Ford, is a Jesuit high school. The third woman to publicly accuse Judge Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct has spoken on camera for the first time about her allegations. Julie Swetnick alleges in a sworn affidavit she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 80s, joining efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. She says Kavanaugh was present at a party in which she herself was the victim of a gang rape. Swetnick spoke with Showtime's John Heilman.
Brett Kavanaugh is going for a seat where he's going to have that seat on the Supreme Court for the rest of his life. And if he's going to have that seat legitimately, all of these things should be investigated, because from what I experienced firsthand, I don't think he belongs on the Supreme Court. And I just want the facts to come out, and I want it to be just, and I want the American people to have those facts and judge for themselves.
Julie Swetnick has demanded a chance to testify under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee. So has another Kavanaugh accuser, Deborah Ramirez, who says Brett Kavanaugh exposed himself and thrust his genitals in her face during a party when they were both Yale freshmen. Ramirez's attorneys say they've been stymied by the committee's majority Republicans as they've tried to arrange to have Ramirez testify. Throughout Thursday's Senate hearing, Judge Kavanaugh repeatedly refused to call for an FBI investigation into the allegations. This is California Democrat Dianne Feinstein questioning Kavanaugh.
What you're saying, if I understand it, is that the allegations by Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and Ms. Swetnick are wrong.
Yeah, that is emphatically what I'm saying. Emphatically. The Swetnick thing is a joke. That is a farce.
Would you like to say more about it?
No.
On Capitol Hill, more than 1,000 protesters chanting, "We believe Christine Ford," rallied outside Congress and marched to the Supreme Court Thursday. Police arrested 59 people as they blocked a street in a peaceful sit-in protest. This is Women's March co-chair Linda Sarsour.
We are outraged at what is happening in that hearing room. The trial that Dr. Ford is being put on. Survivors are always on trial, and their perpetrators are always defended, and they're always protected, and we're tired of it. Enough is enough.
After headlines, we'll spend the hour on Thursday's historic Senate hearings. In breaking news, a major magnitude 7.5 earthquake struck off the Indonesian island of Sulawesi today. Authorities have called off a tsunami warning. There's no immediate word of deaths, injuries, or damage. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Thursday he won't be pressured by President Trump into agreeing to a renegotiated North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Trudeau's comment came ahead of a Sunday deadline set by President Trump for Canada's government to agree to a new version of NAFTA or face additional U.S. tariffs on automobile imports.
Americans are finding that the negotiations are tough because Canadians are tough negotiators, as we should be. But a good and fair deal is still very possible, but we won't sign a bad deal for Canadians.
Last month, the Trump administration and Mexico's government reached a preliminary agreement to revise portions of NAFTA. On the U.S.-Mexico border, construction crews had begun work on a new steel wall separating El Paso, Texas, from neighboring Ciudad Juarez. The new 4-mile-long section of 18-foot-high wall will replace an existing border fence at an estimated cost of $22 million. This is El Paso County Commissioner David Stout speaking at a protest against the wall earlier this week.
It damages this community because ours is a binational community. We all have family, friends, and coworkers who live on that side and work here, or vice versa. And in my opinion, we're sending a very ugly message to our brothers in Mexico. While it's one of the countries we in the United States depend on the most economically, especially the communities along the border.
President Trump has failed in his campaign promise to build a wall along the entire southern border and to make Mexico pay for it. Elsewhere in Texas, immigrant rights groups say some 70 immigrant fathers and some of their children have launched a hunger strike as they languish inside the Karnes County Civil Detention Center, a for-profit immigration jail under contract with ICE. The fathers on strike had been previously separated from their children at the U.S.-Mexico border under the Trump administration's zero-tolerance crackdown. Now reunited behind bars, fathers and their children are demanding immediate freedom. This is one of the hunger strikers speaking by phone with the group People Without Borders.
Today we started a hunger strike. Our children are with us. They are not attending their schools, nor are they eating. We are afraid that ICE is going to retaliate against us and separate us again, as they separated 16 parents on August 15th. I don't understand the laws of this country. They are unjust. The majority of the parents who are reunited were freed.
The hunger strike at Karnes Detention Center comes as new numbers released by the Trump administration show at least 136 migrant children separated from their parents at the border are still in U.S. government custody more than 2 months after a deadline set by a federal judge for reunification. 3 of the children are under the age of 5. In Mexico City, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador welcomed the head of the International Olympic Committee Thursday to a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the 1968 Olympic Games held in Mexico's capital city. The ceremony came just days after Mexico's government acknowledged for the first time that the state was criminally responsible for the massacre of hundreds of student protesters in Mexico City on the eve of the 68 Olympics. To date, no one has been convicted over what's known as the Tlatelolco massacre. Interior Ministry official Jaime Roshan said Monday, quote, "The use of sniper fire was a state crime aimed at creating chaos, terror, and an official narrative to criminalize the protest. It was a state crime that continued beyond October 2nd with arbitrary arrests and torture," he said. And in Colombia, human rights groups are warning of an epidemic of murders targeting environmentalists and leaders of social movements. New statistics compiled by a Colombian human rights group found more than 38,000 people have been displaced and 110 social leaders killed in the first 8 months of the year. The swell in violence is centered in areas where armed conflict has been historically most active, and as Colombia's peace process has faltered under its new right-wing president, Iván Duque. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Republican-led Senate Judiciary Committee is moving ahead with plans to vote on the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh today as a Supreme Court justice. This comes after an extraordinary day of testimony from Kavanaugh and Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the California psychologist who testified she was 100% positive that it was Kavanaugh who attempted to rape her at a high school party in 1982. During the hearing, Kavanaugh said he was innocent and claimed he was the victim of a left-wing plot of, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, unquote. Republicans are hoping to push ahead with a full vote in the Senate this weekend or early next week, even though the FBI has not investigated the allegations of Dr. Blasey Ford or other women who have accused Kavanaugh of sexual assault or misconduct. In a major development, the American Bar Association has called on the Senate Judiciary Committee to halt the Kavanaugh confirmation process until an FBI investigation is completed. In a letter to the committee, the ABA said, quote, "We make this request because of ABA's respect for the rule of law and due process under law." The ABA had previously given Kavanaugh its highest rating of unanimous well-qualified for the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, editors of America magazine, the national weekly published by the Jesuits of the United States, called for Kavanaugh's nomination to be withdrawn. Georgetown Prep, that's Georgetown Preparatory School, where Kavanaugh was a student when he allegedly assaulted Blasey Ford, is a Jesuit high school. Just as Thursday's hearing gavelled to a close, President Trump took to Twitter to demand an immediate Senate vote on Kavanaugh's nomination, tweeting, "Judge Kavanaugh showed America exactly why I nominated him. His testimony was powerful, honest, and riveting," unquote. Well, today we bring you excerpts from Thursday's historic hearing. We begin with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. The nation hears her for the first time in her own words.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school. I have described the events publicly before. I summarized them in my letter to Ranking Member Feinstein and again in a letter to Chairman Grassley. I understand and appreciate the importance of your hearing from me directly about what happened to me and the impact that it has had on my life and on my family. I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. I attended the Holton Arms School in Bethesda, Maryland from 1978 to 1984. Holton Arms is an all-girls school that opened in 1901. During my time at the school, girls at Holton Arms frequently met and became friendly with boys from all-boys schools in the area, including the Landon School, Georgetown Prep, Gonzaga High School, as well as our country clubs and other places where kids and families socialized. This is how I met Brett Kavanaugh, the boy who sexually assaulted me. During my freshman and sophomore school years, when I was 14 and 15 years old, my group of friends intersected with Brett and his friends for a short period of time. I had been friendly with a classmate of Brett's for a short time during my freshman and sophomore year. And it was through that connection that I attended a number of parties that Brett also attended. We did not know each other well, but I knew him and he knew me. In the summer of 1982, like most summers, I spent most every day at the Columbia Country Club in Chevy Chase, Maryland, swimming and practicing diving. One evening that summer, after a day of diving at the club, I attended a small gathering at a house in the Bethesda area. There were 4 boys I remember specifically being at the house: Brett Kavanaugh, Mark Judge, a boy named PJ, and one other boy whose name I cannot recall. I also remember my friend Leland attending. I do not remember all of the details of how that gathering came together, but like many that summer, it was almost surely a spur-of-the-moment gathering. I truly wish I could be more helpful with more detailed answers to all of the questions that have and will be asked about how I got to the party and where it took place and so forth. I don't have all the answers, and I don't remember as much as I would like to. But the details about that night that bring me here today are the ones I will never forget. They have been seared into my memory and have haunted me episodically as an adult. When I got to the small gathering, people were drinking beer in a small living room, family room type area on the first floor of the house. I drank 1 beer. Brett and Mark were visibly drunk. Early in the evening, I went up a very narrow set of stairs leading from the living room to a second floor to use the restroom. When I got to the top of the stairs, I was pushed from behind into a bedroom across from the bathroom. I couldn't see who pushed me. Brett and Mark came into the bedroom and locked the door behind them. There was music playing in the bedroom. It was turned up louder by either Brett or Mark once we were in the room. I was pushed onto the bed, and Brett got on top of me. He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me. I yelled, hoping that someone downstairs might hear me, and I tried to get away from him, but his weight was heavy. Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time. Mark seemed ambivalent, at times urging Brett on, and at times telling him to stop. A couple of times I made eye contact with Mark and thought he might try to help me, but he did not. During this assault, Mark came over and jumped on the bed twice while Brett was on top of me. And the last time that he did this, we toppled over and Brett was no longer on top of me. I was able to get up and run out of the room. Directly across from the bedroom was a small bathroom. I ran inside the bathroom and locked the door. I waited until I heard Brett and Mark leave the bedroom, laughing, and loudly walk down the narrow stairway, pinballing off the walls on the way down. I waited, and when I did not hear them come back up the stairs, I left the bathroom, went down the same stairwell, through the living room, and left the house. I remember being on the street and feeling an enormous sense of relief that I had escaped that house and that Brett and Mark were not coming outside after me. Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I did not want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and just pretend that it didn't happen. Over the years, I told very, very few friends that I had this traumatic experience. I told my husband before we were married that I had experienced a sexual assault. I had never told the details to anyone, the specific details, until May 2012 during a couples counseling session. The reason this came up in counseling is that my husband and I had completed a very extensive, very long remodel of our home, and I insisted on a second front door, an idea that he and others disagreed with and could not understand. In explaining why I wanted a second front door, I began to describe the assault in detail. I recall saying that the boy who assaulted me could someday be on the U.S. Supreme Court, and spoke a bit about his background at an elitist all-boys school in Bethesda, Maryland. My husband recalls that I named my attacker as Brett Kavanaugh. After that May 2012 therapy session, I did my best to ignore the memories of the assault, because recounting them caused me to relive the experience and caused panic and anxiety. Occasionally, I would discuss the assault in an individual therapy session, but talking about it caused more reliving of the trauma, so I tried not to think about it or discuss it. But over the years, I went through periods where I thought about the attack. I had confided in some close friends that I had had an experience with sexual assault. Occasionally, I stated that my assailant was a prominent lawyer or judge, but I did not use his name. I do not recall each person I spoke to about Brett's assault, and some friends have reminded me of these conversations since the publication of the Washington Post story on September 16, 2018. But until July 2018, I had never named Mr. Kavanaugh as my attacker outside of therapy. This changed in early July 2018. I saw press reports stating that Brett Kavanaugh was on the short list of a list of very well-qualified Supreme Court nominees. I thought it was my civic duty to relay the information I had about Mr. Kavanaugh's conduct so that those considering his nomination would know about this assault. On July 6th, I had a sense of urgency to relay the information to the Senate and the President as soon as possible before a nominee was selected. I did not know how specifically to do this. I called my congressional representative and let her receptionist know that someone on the President's shortlist had attacked me. I also sent a message to the encrypted Washington Post confidential tip line. I did not use my name, but I provided the names of Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge. I stated that Mr. Kavanaugh had assaulted me in the 1980s in Maryland. This was an extremely hard thing for me to do, but I felt that I couldn't not do it. Over the next 2 days, I told a couple of close friends on the beach in Aptos, California, that Mr. Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted me. I was very conflicted as to whether to speak out. On July 9th, I received a return phone call from the office of Congresswoman Anna Eshoo after Mr. Kavanaugh had become the nominee. I met with her staff on July 18th and with her on July 20th, describing the assault and discussing my fears about coming forward. Later, we discussed the possibility of sending a letter to Ranking Member Feinstein, who is one of my state senators, describing what occurred. My understanding is that Representative Eshoo's office delivered a copy of my letter to Senator Feinstein's office on July 30th. The letter included my name, but also a request that it be kept confidential. My hope was that providing the information confidentially would be sufficient to allow the Senate to consider Mr. Kavanaugh's serious misconduct without having to make myself, my family, or anyone's family vulnerable to the personal attacks and invasions of privacy that we have faced since my name became public. In a letter dated August 31st, Senator Feinstein wrote that she would not share the letter without my explicit consent, and I appreciated this commitment. Sexual assault victims should be able to decide for themselves when and whether their private experience is made public. As the hearing date got closer, I struggled with a terrible choice. Do I share the facts with the Senate and put myself and my family in the public spotlight? Or do I preserve our privacy and allow the Senate to make its decision without knowing the full truth of his past behaviors? I agonized daily with this decision throughout August and September 2018. The sense of duty that originally motivated me to reach out confidentially to the Washington Post and to Anna Eshoo's office when there was still a list of extremely qualified candidates, and to Senator Feinstein was always there, but my fears of the consequences of speaking out started to exponentially increase. During August 2018, the press reported that Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation was virtually certain. Persons painted him as a champion of women's rights and empowerment. And I believed that if I came forward, my single voice would be drowned out by a chorus of powerful supporters. By the time of the confirmation hearings, I had resigned myself to remaining quiet and letting the committee and the Senate make their decision without knowing what Mr. Kavanaugh had done to me. Once the press started reporting on the existence of the letter I had sent to Senator Feinstein, I faced mounting pressure. Reporters appeared at my home and at my workplace, demanding information about the letter in the presence of my graduate students. They called my bosses and coworkers and left me many messages, making it clear that my name would inevitably be released to the media. I decided to speak out publicly to a journalist who had originally responded to the tip I had sent to the Washington Post and who had gained my trust. It was important for me to describe the details of the assault in my own words. Since September 16th, the date of the Washington Post story, I have experienced an outpouring of support from people in every state of this country. Thousands and thousands of people who have had their lives dramatically altered by sexual violence have reached out to share their experience and have thanked me for coming forward. We have received tremendous support from our friends and our community. At the same time, my greatest fears have been realized, and the reality has been far worse than what I expected. My family and I have been the target of constant harassment and death threats, and I have been called the most vile and hateful names imaginable. These messages, while far fewer than the expressions of support, have been terrifying and have rocked me to my core. People have posted my personal information and that of my parents online on the internet. This has resulted in additional emails, calls, and threats. My family and I were forced to move out of our home. Since September 16th, my family and I have been visiting in various secure locales, at times separated and at times together, with the help of security guards. This past Tuesday evening, my work email was hacked and messages were sent out trying to recant my description of the sexual assault. Apart from the assault itself, these past couple of weeks have been the hardest of my life. I've had to relive this trauma in front of the world, and I've seen my life picked apart by people on television, on Twitter, other social media, other media, and in this body who have never met me or spoken with me. I have been accused of acting out of partisan political motives. Those who say that do not know me. I am an independent person, and I am no one's pawn. My motivation in coming forward was to be helpful and to provide facts about how Mr. Kavanaugh's actions have damaged my life so that you could take into a serious consideration as you make your decision about how to proceed. It is not my responsibility to determine whether Mr. Kavanaugh deserves to sit on the Supreme Court. My responsibility is to tell you the truth. I understand that a professional prosecutor has been hired to ask me questions, and I'm committed to doing my very best to answer them. I have never been questioned by a prosecutor, and I will do my best. At the same time, because the committee members will be judging my credibility, I do hope to be able to engage directly with each of you.
That's the opening statement from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who testified in Thursday's historic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. She would later say in questioning she was 100% positive it was Brett Kavanaugh, President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, who attempted to rape her in 1982 when she was 15. When we come back, we'll hear part of Brett Kavanaugh's opening response.
Hush, little baby, don't you cry. You bring us hope, a new reason to try. Hush, little girl, don't say a word. Papa doesn't want your cries to be heard.
Holding on tight to the dreams that we have made. Things happen for a reason, and so I pray.
Hush, young woman, it'll be over soon. The man just needs to feel power over you. Hush, young mama, don't make him mad. To save your little ones, his way must be
Time to Be Free by Dawn Mason from the album Songs of Survival, a benefit album to support survivors of sexual violence. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, we're bringing you excerpts from Thursday's historic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. We started with the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Now we go to the testimony of President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. In the morning, Blasey Ford testified she was 100% positive positive it was Kavanaugh who attempted to rape her at a small gathering of high school students in 1982. In the afternoon, Judge Kavanaugh testified. While he said he did not watch Blasey Ford's testimony, he repeatedly denied her allegations, denouncing them with barely controlled rage, repeatedly choking up with tears in his eyes. He singled out Democrats on the committee and accused them of staging a circus aimed at derailing his nomination. This is an excerpt of Brett Kavanaugh's opening statement.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation. Shortly after I was nominated, the Democratic Senate leader said he would, quote, oppose me with everything he's got. A Democratic senator on this committee publicly referred to me as evil. Evil. Think about that word. And said that those who supported me were, quote, complicit in evil. Another Democratic senator on this committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh is your worst nightmare. A former head of the Democratic National Committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh will threaten the lives of millions of Americans for decades to come. I understand the passions of the moment, but I would say to those senators, your words have meaning. Millions of Americans listened carefully to you. Given comments like those, is it any surprise that people have been willing to do anything, to make any physical threat against my family, to send any violent email to my wife, to make any kind of allegation against me and against my friends, to blow me up and take me down? You sowed the wind. For decades to come, I fear that the whole country will reap the whirlwind. The behavior of several of the Democratic members of this committee at my hearing a few weeks ago was an embarrassment. But at least it was just a good old-fashioned attempt at borking. Those efforts didn't work. When I did at least okay enough at the hearings that it looked like I might actually get confirmed, a new tactic was needed. Some of you were lying in wait and had it ready. This first allegation was held in secret for weeks by a Democratic member of this committee and by staff. It would be needed only if you couldn't take me out on the merits. When it was needed, this allegation was unleashed and publicly deployed over Dr. Ford's wishes. And then, as no doubt was expected, if not planned, came a long series of false last-minute smears designed to scare me and drive me out of the process before any hearing occurred. Crazy stuff. Gangs, illegitimate children, fights on boats in Rhode Island. All nonsense, reported breathlessly and often uncritically by the media. This has destroyed my family and my good name, a good name built up through decades of very hard work and public service at the highest levels of the American government. This whole two-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus. The consequences will extend long past my nomination. The consequences will be with us for decades. This grotesque and coordinated character assassination will dissuade competent and good people of all political persuasions from serving our country. And as we all know, in the United States political system of the early 2000s, what goes around comes around. I am an optimistic guy. I always try to be on the sunrise side of the mountain, to be optimistic about the day that is coming. But today, I have to say that I fear for the future. Last time I was here, I told this committee that a federal judge must be independent, not swayed by public or political pressure. I said I was such a judge, and I am. I will not be intimidated into withdrawing from this process. You've tried hard. You've given it your all. No one can question your effort. But your coordinated and well-funded effort to destroy my good name and destroy my family will not drive me out. The vile threats of violence against my family will not drive me out. You may defeat me in the final vote, but you'll never get me to quit. Never. I'm here today to tell the truth. I've never sexually assaulted anyone. Not in high school, not in college, not ever. Sexual assault is horrific. One of my closest friends to this day is a woman who was sexually abused and who in the 1990s, when we were in our 30s, confided in me about the abuse and sought my advice. I was one of the only people she consulted. Allegations of sexual assault must always be taken seriously, always. Those who make allegations always deserve to be heard. At the same time, the person who is the subject of the allegations also deserves to be heard. Due process is a foundation of the American rule of law. Due process means listening to both sides.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee Thursday. When we come back, we'll hear questioning of both of those who testified, Dr. Blasey Ford and Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Stay with us.
You can cry all night, you can cry forever for the crimes of mankind against these little ones. While their eyes burn bright, we only set our sights on the war of every land against its neighbor. Shame, yeah, shame, shame, yeah, shame. One day the sun will refuse to shine, and the moon and the stars will close their eyes.
Shame by Bill Fay. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end the hour today with the questioning of both people who testified yesterday at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testified in the morning into the early afternoon, and then Judge Brett Kavanaugh responded, though he said he did not hear her testimony in the morning. This is Senate Judiciary Committee member, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, questioning Judge Kavanaugh.
Judge Kavanaugh, earlier today, Dr. Christine Ford sat in that same chair, and under oath, she said clearly and unequivocally that she was the victim of sexual assault at your hands. She answered our questions directly, and she didn't flinch at the prospect of submitting herself to an FBI investigation of these charges. We know, and I'm sure she's been advised by her attorneys, that a person lying to the FBI can face criminal prosecution. You have clearly and unequivocally denied that you assaulted Dr. Ford. With that statement, you must believe that there is no credible evidence or any credible witness that could prove otherwise. You started off with an impassioned statement at the beginning, and I can imagine, try to imagine what you have been through or your family's been through, and I'm sure I wouldn't get close to it. But it was an
No,
impassioned...
you wouldn't.
I'm sure I wouldn't. It's an impassioned statement. And in the course of it, you said, I welcome any kind of investigation. I quote you. I welcome any kind of investigation. I've got a suggestion for you. Right now, turn to your left in the front row, to Don McGahn, counsel to President Donald Trump. Ask him to suspend this hearing and nomination process until the FBI completes its investigation of the charges made by Dr. Ford and others and goes to bring the witnesses forward and provides that information to this hearing. I'm sure that the chairman at that point will understand that that is a reasonable request to finally put to rest these charges if they are false or to prove them if they are not. You spent 2 years in the White House office that approved judicial nominees. You turned to the FBI over and over and over again for their work. Let's bring them in here and now. Turn to Don McGahn and tell him it's time to get this done. An FBI investigation is the only way to answer some of these questions.
Stop the clock. This committee is running this hearing, not the White House, not Don McGahn, not even you as a nominee. We are here today because Dr. Ford asked for an opportunity here. I know you did too as well. In fact, maybe even before she did. We're here because people wanted to be heard from charges that they all thought were unfair, or activities like sexual assault was unfair. So I want to assure Senator Durbin, regardless of what you say to Senator Don McGahn, we're not suspending this hearing.
That was Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley responding to Senator Dick Durbin. Not one of the 11 Republican senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who are all white men. There's never been a Republican woman in the history of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Not one of these 11 men questioned Dr. Blasey Ford directly, instead ceding all their time to Arizona sex crimes prosecutor Rachel Mitchell, who Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called a female assistant. Mitchell was also scheduled to question Judge Kavanaugh on behalf of the Republican senators, but they quickly stopped her line of questioning after she asked Judge Kavanaugh about details of parties and gatherings he attended in the summer of 1982.
Do you still have your calendars there?
I do.
I would like you to look at the July 1st entry.
Yes.
The entry says, and I quote, "Go to Timmy's for skis with Judge, Tom, PJ, Bernie, and Squee."
Squee. Okay. It's a nickname.
Okay. To what does this refer and to whom?
So first says Tobin's House workout. So that's one of the football workouts that we would have that Dr. Finizio would run for guys on the football team during the summer. So we would be there. That's usually 6 to 8 or so, kind of till near dark. And then it looks like we went over to Timmy's. You want to know their last names too? I'm happy to do it.
If you could just identify, is Judge Mark Judge?
It is.
And is PJ Smith?
It is.
During his answer, Brett Kavanaugh confirmed he attended this gathering on July 1st, 1982, with Mark Judge and PJ, that's Patrick Smith, two of the same people identified by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. But Rachel Mitchell, the sex crimes prosecutor, brought in by the Republicans, never got a chance to ask a follow-up round of questions. Soon after, Senator Lindsey Graham jumped in, becoming the first Republican to directly question Brett Kavanaugh, and then the others followed suit. Graham began by going after his Democratic counterparts.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. You've said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy. Are you a gang rapist?
No.
I cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham, that you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford. None. She's as much of a victim as you are.
Brett Kavanaugh's drinking habits came up repeatedly during Thursday's hearing, including by the judge himself.
My friends and I sometimes got together and had parties on weekends. The drinking age was 18 in Maryland for most of my time in high school and was 18 in D.C. for all of my time in high school. I drank beer with my friends. Almost everyone did. Sometimes I had too many beers. Sometimes others did. I liked beer. I still like beer. But I did not drink beer to the point of blacking out, and I never sexually assaulted anyone.
Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar later questioned Kavanaugh about his drinking.
Okay, drinking is one thing, but the concern is about truthfulness. And in your written testimony, you said sometimes you had too many drinks. Was there ever a time when you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened or part of what happened the night before?
No, I remember what happened, and I think you've probably had beers, Senator, and so
you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
They then went to a break, and after returning from recess, Judge Kavanaugh apologized to Senator Klobuchar. I want to turn now to Democratic Senator Kamala Harris questioning Brett Kavanaugh.
Judge Kavanaugh, have you taken a professionally administered polygraph test as it relates to this issue?
No, I'll do whatever the committee wants. Of course, those are not admissible in federal court, but I'll do whatever the committee wants. They're not admissible in federal court because they're not reliable, as you know.
So you've not taken one?
Right.
All three of the women who have made sworn allegations against you have called for an independent FBI investigation into the claims. You've been asked during the course of this hearing by 4 different members, by my count, at least 8 times today, and also earlier this week on national television, whether you would call for the White House to authorize an FBI investigation. Each time you have declined to do so. Now, I know you do, that the FBI is an agency of men and women who are sworn and trained law enforcement, who in the course of conducting background investigations on nominees for the Supreme Court of the United States and others are charged with conducting those background investigations because they are sworn law enforcement and they have the expertise and the ability and the history of doing that. So I'm going to ask you one last time. Are you willing to ask the White House to authorize the FBI to investigate the claims that have been made against you?
Well, I'll do whatever the committee wants, of course.
And I've heard you say that, but I've not heard you answer a very specific question that's been asked, which is, are you willing to ask the White House to conduct an investigation by the FBI to get to whatever you believe is the bottom of the allegations that have been levied against you?
The FBI would gather witness statements. You have the witness statements. I
don't want to debate with you how they do their business. I'm just asking, are you willing to ask the White House to conduct such an investigation? Because as you are aware, the FBI did conduct a background investigation into you before we were aware of these most recent allegations. So are you willing to ask the White House to do that? And say yes or no, and then we can move on.
I've had 6 background investigations over 26 years.
Sir, as it relates to the recent allegations, are you willing to have them do it?
The witness testimony is before you. No witness who was there supports that I was there.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, and we can move on. You have said in your opening statement, you characterized these allegations as a conspiracy directed against you. I'll point out to you that Justice now, Neil Gorsuch, was nominated by this president. He was considered by this body just last year. I did a rough kind of analysis of similarities. You both attended Georgetown Prep. You both attended very prestigious law schools. You both clerked for Justice Kennedy. You were both circuit judges. You were both nominated to the Supreme Court. You were both questioned about your record. The only difference is that you have been accused of sexual assault. How do you reconcile your statement about a conspiracy against you with the treatment of someone who was before this body not very long ago?
I explained that in my opening statement, Senator. Look at the evidence here, the calendars, look at the witness statements, look at Ms. Kaiser's statement.
Okay.
That was Kamala Harris questioning Judge Kavanaugh. Before his opening statement and the questions, the Democratic senators talked to and questioned Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. This is Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal.
I have found your testimony powerful and credible, and I believe you. You're a teacher, correct?
Correct.
Well, you have given America an amazing teaching moment. And you may have other moments in the classroom, but you have inspired and you have enlightened America. You have inspired and given courage to women to come forward, as they have done to every one of our offices and many other public places. You have inspired and you have enlightened men in America to listen respectfully to women survivors and men who have survived sexual attack. And that is a profound public service, regardless of what happens with this nomination. And so the teachers of America, the people of America, should be really proud of what you have done. Let me tell you why I believe you. Not only because of the prior consistent statements and the polygraph tests and your request for an FBI investigation and your urging that this committee hear from other witnesses who could corroborate or dispute your story. But also, you have been very honest about what you cannot remember. And someone composing a story can make it all come together in a seamless way, but someone who is honest, I speak from my experience as a prosecutor as well, is also candid about what she or he cannot remember. The senators on the other side of the aisle have been silent. This procedure is unprecedented in a confirmation hearing.
We end today with Democratic Senator Dick Durbin questioning Dr. Christine Blasey Ford.
Last night, the Republican staff of this committee released to the media a timeline that shows that they've interviewed 2 people who claimed they were the ones who actually assaulted you. I'm asking you to address this new defense of mistaken identity directly. Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
100%.
That was Dr. Christine Blasey Ford being questioned by Senator Durbin. And that ends our highlights of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. Historic moment. The Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to vote today on the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced with the help of Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills. Special thanks to Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman.